You are a shameless gold digger, just using my son for everything he has. My mother-in-law shouted at me during our housewarming party. The whole room froze. I just smiled. Brenda, I said, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. In fact, let me go get the paperwork, and you can be the first to find out whose name is actually on the deed to this house. Before we go on, hit like, make sure to subscribe, and comment. What do you think she'll do when she sees the deed? Let me back up and tell you how we got here, because this moment didn't just happen. It was the result of 10 long years of biting my tongue, swallowing my pride, and pretending to be smaller than I was. 10 years of listening to my mother-in-law diminish everything I'd worked for. 10 years of keeping the peace for the sake of my husband, who I loved more than anything. But on that night, standing in the living room of the home I had paid for with my own money, something inside me finally snapped. My name is Anna, and I'm a vice president at one of the largest tech companies in the country. I didn't come from money. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood where my parents both worked full-time jobs just to keep us comfortable. They taught me that if I wanted something in life, I had to work for it. So I did. I studied hard, got scholarships, graduated at the top of my class, and climbed the corporate ladder one brutal rung at a time. By the time I was 35, I was making over $400,000 a year. By 40, I'd broken the $500,000 mark. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because it's important to understand what Brenda refused to see. I met David when I was 30. He was a high school history teacher and the head baseball coach at a private school. He made about $60,000 a year, and he absolutely loved what he did. When I met him at a friend's barbecue, I was struck by how he talked about his students. His face lit up when he described helping a struggling kid finally understand the Civil War, or watching his team win their first championship in a decade. He had this passion, this genuine love for what he did, and it was magnetic. We dated for 2 years before getting engaged. From the very beginning, David was supportive of my career. He never once made me feel bad about earning more than him. He never acted insecure or threatened. When I had to work late or travel for business, he'd pack my suitcase and tell me how proud he was of me. When I got promoted, he'd take me out to celebrate. He was, and still is, the best partner I could have asked for. But his mother, that was a different story. I met Brenda 3 months into our relationship. David had warned me that she was traditional, which I soon learned was code for deeply uncomfortable with any woman who doesn't fit into her 1950s fantasy world. Brenda grew up in a small town where women were expected to marry young, have children, and dedicate their lives to supporting their husbands. She had done exactly that. She married David's father at 21, never worked outside the home, and poured all her energy into being what she considered a proper wife. When she found out I was the breadwinner in our relationship, she couldn't handle it. The first time David told her what I did for a living, she actually laughed. She thought he was joking. When she realized he wasn't, her smile froze on her face, and she changed the subject so fast I got whiplash. The comments started small, little digs that could be dismissed as innocent observations if you wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. At our engagement party, she loudly told everyone that David was such a generous man for letting his fiancée focus on her career. She said it like he was doing me a favor by not demanding I quit my job. At our wedding, she gave a toast where she talked about how proud she was that David had found someone who appreciated his stability and strength. The subtext was clear to everyone in that room. She was telling people that I had latched onto her son because he was a good provider, when the exact opposite was true. After we got married, it got worse, much worse. Brenda would call David at least 3 times a week. During those calls, she'd ask him pointed questions about our finances. "Are you able to cover the bills okay?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with fake concern. Is Anna being reasonable about expenses? Ugh. She acted like I was some out-of-control spender bleeding him dry, when in reality, I paid for literally everything. Our rent, my paycheck, our groceries, my credit card, our car payments, insurance, utilities, dinners out, vacations, all me. David contributed what he could, and I never minded. We were a team. His money went into our joint checking account, and he used it for his personal expenses and to treat us to nice things when he wanted to. But the vast majority of our lifestyle was funded by my salary, and Brenda either didn't know or refused to acknowledge it. She had this way of praising David that was clearly designed to insult me. We'd go to family dinners, and she'd announce to the entire table, "David works so hard to take care of his family. I'm so proud of how he provides." I'd be sitting right there, having just come from a 14-hour workday, and she'd look right through me. Once, David and I took her out to a nice restaurant for her birthday. It was an expensive place, the kind with tiny portions and a wine list thicker than a phone book. I paid for everything, like I always did. As we were leaving, Brenda hugged David and said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "Thank you so much for this lovely dinner, sweetheart. You're so good to your mother." She didn't even look at me. David would get embarrassed and try to correct her. "Mom, Anna paid for dinner," he'd say quietly. Brenda would wave her hand dismissively and say something like, "Well, it's all the same pot, isn't it?" Except it wasn't. There was my pot, which was overflowing. And there was David's pot, which was modest but respectable. She just couldn't stand admitting which one funded our life. The comments about my wardrobe were constant. I dressed professionally because I had to. I was in meetings with executives and clients who expected a certain level of polish. I wore tailored suits, good shoes, and carried a quality handbag. These weren't frivolous purchases, they were investments in my career. But Brenda saw them as evidence of my gold-digging ways. "That's a nice jacket," she'd say when I arrived at her house for Sunday dinner. "Must have cost a fortune. I hope David can afford it." She'd say it with a sweet smile, like she was complimenting me, but the implication was clear. She thought I was spending David's money on designer clothes while he struggled to keep up. One Christmas, she gave me a gift that made my blood boil. It was a book. The title was something like The Surrendered Wife, a practical guide to finding intimacy, passion, and peace with your man. Inside the cover, she'd written a note. "I thought this might help you understand how to support David better. Love, Brenda." I smiled, thanked her, and later that night, I threw the book in the trash. David was horrified when he found out what she'd given me. He wanted to confront her, but I talked him out of it. I always talked him out of it. I told myself it wasn't worth the drama. I told myself that she was his mother, and I didn't want to put him in the middle. I told myself I was being the bigger person, but really, I was just shrinking myself to make everyone else comfortable. The worst part wasn't even the insults. It was watching David squirm every time his mother opened her mouth. He loved his mom, despite her flaws, and he hated conflict. Every time Brenda said something cutting, David would get this pained look on his face. Later, in private, he'd apologize profusely. "She doesn't mean it," he'd say. "She's just from a different generation. Please, just ignore her. It's not worth the fight." So I did. I ignored her for years. I smiled through the insults. I let her give credit to David for things I had done. I pretended not to notice when she'd tell people that her son was doing so well and providing such a nice life for me. I kept the peace, even though it was killing me inside. Then, 2 years ago, David and I decided we were ready to buy a house. Not just any house, our dream house. We'd been renting a nice apartment in the city, but we wanted space. We wanted a yard. We wanted a place that felt like ours, where we could put down roots and maybe eventually start a family. We spent months looking. Every weekend, we'd tour open houses. We'd talk about what we wanted. A big kitchen for me, because I love to cook. A home office where I could work when I needed to. A garage for David's woodworking hobby. A good school district for the kids we hope to have someday. Then we found it. A beautiful 4-bedroom house in an upscale neighborhood. It had everything we wanted and more. Hardwood floors, a renovated kitchen with marble countertops, a huge backyard with a deck, and a finished basement. It was perfect. It was also $2 million. David and I sat down and looked at our finances. Well, mostly my finances. I had been saving aggressively for years. I had a robust investment portfolio, a healthy retirement account, and a significant amount of cash saved up. I could afford a down payment of $1.5 million. That would leave a $500,000 mortgage, which I could easily cover with my salary. David couldn't contribute much to the down payment. Teachers don't make the kind of money that allows for massive savings, especially when you're paying off student loans. He had about $20,000 saved, which was great, but it was a drop in the bucket compared to what we needed. We talked about it, and I made a decision. I would buy the house. My name would be on the deed. My name would be on the mortgage. It would be my house, legally speaking, but it would be our home. David was uncomfortable with this at first. He didn't like the idea of me shouldering the entire financial burden, but I reminded him that this was how our entire relationship had worked. I made more, so I contributed more. It didn't mean I loved him less or that he was less important. It just meant we were playing to our strengths. He finally agreed, and we moved forward with the purchase. The process took a few months. There were inspections, appraisals, mountains of paperwork. I worked with the bank, provided my financial records, and signed document after document. When we finally got the keys, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. This was ours. This was the life we'd built together. Then came the conversation about David's mother. We were unpacking boxes in the kitchen when David brought it up. "What are we going to tell my mom?" he asked. "About the house, I mean. About how we bought it." I looked at him, confused. "We tell her the truth. That we saved up and I bought it." David winced. "She's going to have questions. She's going to want to know how we afforded it. And if she finds out you bought it alone, she's going to make it a thing." I felt my stomach tighten. "Make it a thing how?" "You know how she is," he said, not meeting my eyes. "She's going to say stuff. She's going to make comments. She's going to act like I'm less of a man because my wife bought the house. I just don't want to deal with it." I put down the box I was holding. "David, I'm not going to lie about this. I'm proud of this house. I worked hard for it. I'm not going to pretend you bought it just to protect your mother's delicate sensibilities." He looked miserable. "I'm not asking you to lie. I'm just asking you to maybe not volunteer all the details. If she asks, we can just say we bought it together, which is true. It's our house." "But it's my name on the deed," I said. "Does she need to know that?" he asked. "Can we just let her believe what she's going to believe anyway? That I'm the provider and you're along for the ride? I know it's not fair and I know it's insulting, but it's easier. It's always easier with her. If we just don't correct her assumptions." I should have said no. I should have put my foot down right then and there. But I loved David, and he looked so tired, so worn down by the idea of another fight with his mother. So I agreed. I told him we didn't have to make a big announcement about whose name was on what. We'd just tell people we bought a house, and if Brenda wanted to assume David had paid for it, fine. Let her live in her fantasy world. It was the biggest mistake I ever made. When we invited Brenda over to see the house for the first time, she walked through every room like she was touring a museum. She ran her fingers over the countertops, peeked into closets, and stood in the backyard admiring the view. When she was done, she turned to David with tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you," she said, pulling him into a hug. "You've done so well for yourself. This is the kind of home I always dreamed you'd have. You've worked so hard, and now you can finally enjoy the fruits of your labor." I stood there, invisible, while she praised my husband for my accomplishment. David looked at me over her shoulder, his expression apologetic, but he didn't correct her. He just hugged his mother back and said, "Thanks, Mom." Over the next few months, Brenda told everyone she knew about David's new house. She posted pictures on Facebook with captions like, "So proud of my son and his beautiful new home." She brought her friends by for tours, and I'd overhear her saying things like, "David has done so well for himself. He's always been such a hard worker." Every time, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. But I kept quiet. I kept the peace. I told myself it didn't matter what Brenda thought, as long as David and I knew the truth. Then, we decided to have a housewarming party. It was David's idea. He wanted to have all our friends and family over to celebrate the house properly. We'd been living there for about 6 months, and we'd finally finished unpacking and decorating. The place looked beautiful, and David was so excited to show it off. I agreed, even though the idea of Brenda holding court in my living room made me want to scream. We planned the party for a Saturday afternoon. We invited about 40 people, a mix of David's family, my family, colleagues, and friends. I spent the whole week before preparing. I cleaned every surface until it sparkled. I planned a menu, hired a bartender, and ordered flowers for every room. I wanted everything to be perfect. The day of the party, people started arriving around 2 in the afternoon. Brenda was one of the first to show up. She was dressed like she was going to a country club luncheon in a fancy dress and heels. She swept into the house, kissed David on the cheek, and immediately started acting like the hostess. She positioned herself in the living room and greeted guests as they arrived as if she lived there. She gave impromptu tours to people who hadn't seen the house yet, pointing out features and talking about the neighborhood. I watched from the kitchen, my jaw clenched, as she played Lady of the Manor in my home. David noticed my expression and came over. "I know," he said quietly. "Just let her have this, okay? She'll get bored and settle down." But she didn't settle down. She got worse. More people arrived and the house filled with laughter and conversation. I circulated, playing hostess, making sure everyone had drinks and food. I talked to my colleagues, caught up with old friends, and introduced David's family to my family. Despite Brenda's performance, I was actually having a good time. Then, about an hour into the party, everything fell apart. One of David's cousins, a guy named Mike who I'd always liked, was standing in the living room talking to David. Mike was looking around the house with an impressed expression. "David, man, you've really made it," he said. "This place is incredible. I can't believe you guys pulled this off." Before David could respond, Brenda appeared at his side. She put her arm around her son and beamed at Mike. "He really has done well for himself, hasn't he?" "I'm so proud. David works so hard to provide all this for his family. He's always been such a responsible boy." I was standing about 10 feet away, holding a tray of appetizers. I felt the words hit me like a slap. I'd heard Brenda say things like this before, but something about hearing it in my own home, in front of my friends and colleagues, made my vision go red. I walked over, forcing a smile onto my face. "Brenda," I said, my voice sweet, "I think you mean we worked hard for it." The room didn't go quiet yet. People were still talking and laughing. But the three of us, David, Brenda, and I, were suddenly in our own little bubble of tension. Brenda's smile turned icy. "Of course, dear," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm sure you helped." "I didn't help," I said, my smile not reaching my eyes. "I bought it. Brenda's eyes narrowed. Well, that's a very modern way to look at marriage. But I think we all know who the real provider is in your relationship. David stepped in, his voice strained. Mom, maybe we should talk about this later. But Brenda was on a roll. She'd been waiting for this moment, I realized. She'd been building up to this for years. Every insult, every dig, every snide comment had been leading here to this public confrontation where she could finally say what she'd been thinking all along. Her voice got louder. People nearby started to notice. Conversations began to die down as heads turned toward us. I'm just so tired of the pretense, Brenda announced, her voice carrying across the room. Everyone here knows the truth. Anna, you've been riding on my son's coattails since the day you met him. You are a shameless gold digger, just using my son for everything he has. Now, the room went completely silent. 40 people stopped talking at once. Every single eye turned to look at me. I could feel the weight of their stares, the shock, the anticipation. In that moment, I had a choice. I could do what I'd always done. I could laugh it off, change the subject, pull David aside and let him deal with his mother in private. I could keep the peace, or I could burn it all down. I looked at Brenda. Her face was flushed with righteous anger. She actually believed what she was saying. She genuinely thought I was a leech, a parasite, a woman who had trapped her successful son and was living off his generosity. The delusion was so complete, so total, that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Something inside me clicked into place. A cold, clear certainty settled over me. I was done. I was done shrinking myself. I was done protecting David from his mother's toxicity. I was done pretending that keeping the peace was more important than telling the truth. If Brenda wanted to do this in public, fine. We'd do this in public. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile I used in boardrooms when I was about to destroy a competitor's argument. Brenda, I said, my voice calm and clear. That's the funniest thing I've ever heard. In fact, let me go get the paperwork and you can be the first to find out whose name is actually on the deed to this house. I turned and walked away, leaving Brenda standing there with her mouth open. I could feel everyone's eyes on my back as I crossed the living room and headed down the hallway to my home office. Behind me, the silence was deafening. No one spoke, no one moved. They were all waiting to see what would happen next. I walked into my office and closed the door behind me. For a moment, I just stood there, my heart pounding. I thought about what I was about to do. I thought about the consequences. This was going to humiliate Brenda in front of her entire family. This was going to create a rift that might never heal. This was going to force David to choose between defending me and keeping his relationship with his mother intact. But I also thought about 10 years of insults, 10 years of being made to feel small, 10 years of watching another woman take credit for my accomplishments, 10 years of silence. I walked to the corner of the room where I kept my fireproof safe. I knelt down, entered the combination, and pulled open the heavy door. Inside were all our important documents: birth certificates, passports, insurance policies, and right on top, the paperwork from our home purchase. I didn't just grab the deed. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. I pulled out the entire file. The deed, yes, but also the closing documents. The wire transfer confirmation showing the $1.5 million down payment from my personal investment account. The mortgage application with my name, my income, and my credit score. The mortgage agreement showing me as the sole borrower. The title insurance policy listing me as the sole owner. I had a leather portfolio I used for client presentations sitting on my desk. I opened it and carefully arranged all the documents inside, in order, like I was preparing for a meeting, because that's essentially what this was. A presentation. I was about to present the facts to an audience that had been fed lies for too long. While I was organizing the papers, I spotted something else in the safe. The title and registration for David's car. He drove a nice SUV that he loved. I'd bought it for him 2 years ago as a birthday present. The title was in my name, with him listed as an authorized driver. I'd done it that way because it got us better insurance rates and because, well, I'd paid for it. I grabbed that too and added it to the portfolio. When I was done, I stood up and took a deep breath. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I felt powerful in a way I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was refusing to be erased. I walked back down the hallway toward the living room. As I got closer, I could hear the murmur of voices. People were talking now, in low, urgent whispers. I wondered what Brenda was saying. I wondered if David was trying to warn her, trying to explain. I wondered if anyone had any idea what was coming. I stepped back into the living room. Every head swiveled toward me. I saw my colleagues looking fascinated and a little scared. I saw David's relatives, some looking confused, others looking eager for drama. I saw my own parents standing near the kitchen, my mother with her hand over her mouth. And I saw Brenda. She was still standing in the center of the room, right where I'd left her. But now, she'd rallied. She'd found her confidence again. She was whispering to David's aunt, loud enough for people nearby to hear. "She's completely hysterical," Brenda was saying. "This is so embarrassing. David, you really need to get control of your wife." David was standing next to his mother, his face pale, his eyes locked on me. He looked terrified. He knew what was in that portfolio. He knew what I was about to do. I walked to the center of the room and placed the leather portfolio on the coffee table with a soft thud. The whispers stopped. Once again, the room fell completely silent. I looked at Brenda. "You called me a gold digger," I said. My voice was level, almost conversational, but it carried through the room. "That means you believe I'm with David for his money. So, let's please, all of us, get on the same page about what money we're talking about." I opened the portfolio and pulled out the first document. "This is the deed to this house," I said, holding it up so everyone could see. "The legal document that proves ownership. Let me read you the relevant part." I looked down at the paper and read aloud, slowly and clearly. "The property located at 412 Willow Creek Drive is hereby granted to Anna Marie Smith, a married woman, as her sole and separate property." I looked up, making eye contact with Brenda. "That's my name, my full legal name. You'll notice that David's name doesn't appear anywhere on this document. That's because David doesn't own this house. I do." Brenda's face had started to lose color, but she wasn't done yet. "That's just a formality," she said, her voice shaky. "Married couples do that for tax reasons." "You're right that there can be tax benefits to how property is titled," I said. "But that's not why David's name isn't on this deed. His name isn't on it because he didn't buy it. I did. Let me show you what I mean." I pulled out the next document. "This is a wire transfer confirmation from my personal investment account. The account is titled in my name only. It shows a transfer of $1.5 million to the title company for the down payment on this house." I held it up. $1.5 million from my account. Not David's, not a joint account. Mine. The room was so quiet I could hear someone's watch ticking. I pulled out the next document. "This is the mortgage application. You can see here that I'm listed as the sole applicant. My income, my credit score, my assets. David's information doesn't appear anywhere on this application because the bank didn't need it. My income alone was sufficient to qualify for the loan." I pulled out the final document. "And this is the mortgage agreement for the remaining $500,000. Again, you'll see that I am listed as the sole borrower. I am the only person legally responsible for this debt. The bank granted me this mortgage based on my income, which is $520,000 per year before bonuses. I let that number hang in the air for a moment. I'd never said my exact salary out loud in front of David's family before. I'd always been vague, uncomfortable with flaunting my success. But now, I wanted everyone to understand exactly how much money I made. For comparison, I continued, my voice still calm, David's salary as a high school teacher is approximately $60,000 per year. He's an excellent teacher, and I'm very proud of his work. But his income alone would not have qualified us for this house. My income did. I looked at Brenda. Her face had gone from pink to white. She was gripping her purse like it was a life preserver. I'm not finished, I said. I reached into the portfolio one more time and pulled out the title to David's car. You see the SUV parked in the driveway, the one David drove you here in today? This is the title. It's also in my name. I bought that car for David 2 years ago. It cost $75,000. I paid cash. I closed the portfolio and took a step toward Brenda. So, let me make this very clear, since there seems to be some confusion. I am not using your son. I am supporting him. I am supporting this entire family. The house you are standing in is my house. The car David drove you here in is my car. The furniture you're looking at, the food you're eating, the drink in your hand, all of it was paid for with money I earned. My voice got harder. You have spent the last 10 years insulting me. You've minimized my career, dismissed my accomplishments, and accused me of being a leech. You've done this in private, and you've done it in public. You did it today in front of 40 people, in my own home. You called me a gold digger while standing on floors I paid for, under a roof I paid for, surrounded by a life I built. I looked her dead in the eye. So I will ask you once, as the actual owner of this property. Please apologize or get out of my house. The silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed. No one blinked. Every eye in the room was on Brenda, waiting to see what she would do. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Her face cycled through a series of expressions: shock, humiliation, anger, and finally, something that looked almost like fear. She looked at David, her eyes pleading. For 10 years, David had protected his mother from the consequences of her behavior. He'd made excuses for her. He'd begged me to let things go. He'd chosen peace over truth every single time. I didn't know what he would do now. Part of me was terrified he'd side with her, that he'd tell me I was being cruel, that I'd gone too far. But David surprised me. He walked across the room and stood next to me. He didn't touch me, didn't put his arm around me, but he stood at my side, facing his mother. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. She's right, Mom. About all of it. This is Anna's house. She paid for everything. And you owe her an apology. Brenda stared at her son like she didn't recognize him. David, she whispered, you can't be serious. I'm your mother. And she's my wife, David said. She's been nothing but patient and kind to you for 10 years. She's swallowed her pride and let you say terrible things about her because I asked her to, because I was too afraid to stand up to you. But I'm not afraid anymore. You will apologize to Anna or you will leave. Tears were streaming down Brenda's face now. She looked around the room, searching for an ally, someone who would defend her. But no one met her eyes. David's relatives were all staring at the floor or their drinks. My family and friends were watching with a mixture of satisfaction and secondhand embarrassment. I can't believe this, Brenda said, her voice breaking. I can't believe you're humiliating me like this. In front of everyone. I'm your mother, David. How can you treat me this way? How could you treat my wife that way? David countered. For years, Mom. You've been treating her like this for years. And I let you because I didn't want to make waves. But Anna was right to do this. You needed to hear the truth. Brenda clutched her purse to her chest. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize. I saw something flicker across her face that could have been regret, but then her expression hardened. She pulled herself up straight, lifted her chin, and said, "I will not be spoken to like this in my own son's home." "It's not his home," I said quietly. "It's mine, and you're no longer welcome in it." That broke her. Brenda let out a choked sob, turned, and practically ran for the front door. She yanked it open and fled outside. We heard her car door slam, the engine start, and the screech of tires as she peeled out of the driveway. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, David's Aunt Patricia, a woman I'd always liked, started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. A few other people joined in. Not everyone, but enough. My mother rushed over and hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered in my ear. The party didn't exactly continue like nothing had happened. How could it? But people did start talking again. The bartender, bless him, started making rounds with a tray of shots, and the tension gradually began to ease. Small groups formed, and I heard whispered conversations full of words like, "finally," and "about time," and "good for her." Several of David's relatives came up to me privately to apologize. His Uncle Tom shook my hand and said, "I'm sorry we didn't speak up sooner. We all knew how Brenda talked to you. We should have said something." His cousin Sarah hugged me and said, "That was the most badass thing I've ever seen." My colleagues were less subtle. My friend Marcus, who worked in my department, came over with a huge grin. "That was legendary," he said. "I knew you had it in you. You do this in meetings all the time. Just destroy people with facts and logic. It was only a matter of time before you brought that energy home." David spent the next hour in a daze. He circulated through the party, accepting condolences and congratulations in equal measure. People kept asking him if he was okay, and he kept saying he was fine. But I could see the strain on his face. As the party wound down and guests started to leave, David and I finally had a moment alone in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For not doing that myself," he said. "For letting it get to this point. For asking you to stay quiet all those years. You shouldn't have had to defend yourself like that. I should have been defending you from the beginning." I walked over to him and took his hand. "You did defend me," I said. "When it mattered most, you stood next to me. That's what I needed." "She's going to be devastated," he said quietly. "She's going to tell the whole family her version of what happened. She's going to paint herself as the victim." "I know," I said, "and that's her choice. But I'm done letting her narrative be the only one that matters. Anyone who was here today knows the truth. They saw the documents. They heard her call me a gold digger in my own home. If she wants to lie about it, that's on her, not us." David pulled me into a hug. "I love you," he said. "I love how strong you are. I love that you don't take crap from anyone, not even my mother. I just wish I'd been strong enough to do this sooner." "We're doing it now," I said. "That's what matters." The last guests left around 9 that evening. My parents were the last to go. My dad, who hadn't said much during the confrontation, hugged me at the door and said, "You're just like your mother. Strong, smart, and not willing to be pushed around. I'm glad you finally let that woman have it." After everyone was gone, David and I spent an hour cleaning up. We threw away paper plates, washed glasses, and put away leftover food. We worked in comfortable silence, processing everything that had happened. When the kitchen was finally clean, we sat together on the couch in the living room. the same room where the confrontation had taken place. David held my hand and said, "What do we do now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess we wait and see if she reaches out. If she apologizes, we can talk about rebuilding. If she doesn't, then we know where we stand." "What if she never apologizes?" David asked. "Then we move forward without her," I said. "I'm not going to beg for her approval anymore, David. I'm not going to shrink myself to make her comfortable. If she wants to be part of our lives, she needs to respect me. Actually, respect me, not just tolerate me." David nodded slowly. "You're right. I know you're right. It's just hard. She's my mom." "I know," I said. "And I'm not asking you to cut her out of your life. I'm just asking you to set boundaries, to require that she treat me with basic respect. Is that really too much to ask?" "No," he said. "It's not. And I should have asked it of her years ago." We sat there for a while longer, holding hands in the quiet house. Our house. My house, legally, but ours in every way that mattered. I thought about how the evening had unfolded. I thought about the look on Brenda's face when I'd laid out the documents. I thought about the applause from David's aunt, the supportive hugs from my friends, the look of pride on David's face when he'd stood beside me. I didn't feel guilty. I'd expected to, but I didn't. I felt free. For 10 years, I'd been carrying the weight of Brenda's disapproval, her insults, her constant attempts to diminish me. I'd been bending myself into knots, trying to keep the peace, trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law, trying to prove I was worthy of her son. And tonight, I'd finally put that burden down. I didn't humiliate Brenda out of cruelty. I humiliated her with the truth because it was the only language she understood. She'd built her entire identity around the idea that her son was a provider, a traditional man taking care of his family. She couldn't accept a reality where her son was the one being supported. So, she'd created a fantasy and tried to force everyone else to live in it. But fantasies can't survive contact with reality. And tonight, reality had walked into the room with a leather portfolio and a deed. The next few days were strange. David's phone blew up with calls and texts from his family. Some were supportive, telling him they were glad someone had finally stood up to Brenda. Others were angry, accusing him of humiliating his mother and demanding he apologize. David handled each conversation with a calmness I admired. He didn't apologize, but he didn't attack his mother either. He simply stated the facts and said that Brenda owed me an apology, and until that happened, we needed some space. Brenda herself didn't call. Not that day or the next, or the one after that. Radio silence. David was hurt by it, though he tried to hide it. I could see him checking his phone constantly, hoping for a message that never came. A week after the party, David's father called. He and Brenda had been divorced for 15 years, but they still talked occasionally. "I heard about what happened," he said. "Brenda called me, crying, saying you'd both turned on her." Then I called Patricia and got the real story. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry. I know how Brenda can be. I lived with it for 25 years. You did the right thing, standing up for your wife." That conversation seemed to lift something in David. Knowing his father supported us meant a lot to him. 2 weeks after the party, David's sister Lisa called. She lived across the country and hadn't been at the party, but she'd heard all about it. "I wish I'd been there," she said, laughing. "I would have paid money to see the look on Mom's face. She's been doing this forever, rewriting history to make herself look good and everyone else look bad. I'm glad Anna finally called her out." More days passed. Still no word from Brenda. David went through phases. First he was angry, then hurt, then resigned. "I think this might be it," he said one night. "I think she might actually never speak to us again." "Would that be the worst thing?" I asked gently. He thought about it. "Honestly, number. I love my mom, but I don't like who I am around her. I'm always tense, always trying to manage her feelings, always apologizing for things that aren't my fault. Maybe some distance is what we need. A month after the party, David and I were having dinner when his phone rang. He looked at the screen and went pale. "It's her," he said. "Do you want to answer it?" I asked. He stared at the phone for a long moment, then nodded. He answered and put it on speaker so I could hear. "Hello, Mom." "David." Her voice was small, subdued. "Can we talk?" "I'm here," he said. "Anna's here too. You're on speaker." There was a long pause. "Okay," Brenda said finally. "That's okay. I actually wanted to talk to both of you. Can I come over?" David looked at me. I nodded. "Sure," he said. "When?" "Now?" Brenda asked, "if that's okay. I'm actually parked outside. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying to work up the courage to call." David and I exchanged a look. "Okay," he said. "Come in." We hung up and waited. A minute later, there was a knock at the door. David answered it, and Brenda stepped inside. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and puffy. Her hair wasn't styled like it usually was, and she was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. I'd never seen her dress so casually. We all sat down in the living room. Brenda perched on the edge of the armchair, clutching a tissue. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Brenda looked at me. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry for everything, for what I said at the party, and for everything I've said over the years. You didn't deserve any of it." I didn't say anything. I just waited. "I've spent the last month thinking," Brenda continued. "Really thinking. For the first time in a long time. And I realized that I've been terrible to you. I was so caught up in my own issues, my own insecurities, that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. You're an amazing woman, Anna. You're smart and successful and kind. My son is lucky to have you. And instead of celebrating that, I spent 10 years tearing you down. I'm ashamed of myself." Tears were running down her face now. "I think I was jealous," she admitted. "My whole life, I was taught that my value came from being a wife and mother. I never had a career. I never made my own money. And when I saw you, this brilliant, successful woman who didn't need a man to take care of her, it made me feel small, like my whole life had been a waste. So I tried to make you feel small too. And that was wrong. I'm so sorry." I took a deep breath. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "It means a lot to hear you acknowledge it." "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Brenda said quickly. "I know I have to earn that, but I want to try. If you'll let me, I want to do better. I want to be better." David reached over and took his mother's hand. "We want that too, Mom," he said. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Brenda didn't transform overnight into a perfect mother-in-law, but she did try. She started asking me about my work and actually listening to the answers. She stopped making comments about David being the provider. She even started telling people proudly that her daughter-in-law was a VP at a tech company. It took time to rebuild trust. There were setbacks and awkward moments, but slowly, painfully, we found a new normal. A normal based on honesty instead of pretense. A normal where I didn't have to make myself smaller to make someone else comfortable. Looking back now, I don't regret what I did that night. Yes, it was dramatic. Yes, it was public. Yes, it was humiliating for Brenda. But it was also necessary. Sometimes the only way to break a toxic pattern is to shatter it completely and rebuild from the ground up. That's what we did. We shattered the lie that David was the provider and I was the dependent wife. We shattered the pretense that Brenda's insults were harmless or could be ignored. We shattered the idea that keeping the peace was more important than telling the truth. And from those shattered pieces, we built something stronger, a relationship based on reality, not fantasy. A family that valued honesty over appearances. A marriage where both partners stood up for each other, no matter who they had to stand up against. My mother-in-law humiliated me in my own home, so I humiliated her back with the truth. Was it the right move, or did I go too far? Let me know in the comments.